Meeting to order, and please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sometimes. Okay. Alrighty. Good evening. We are packed house, well-attended meeting again tonight. Appreciate everybody coming.
Down and back.
First off, I'd like to say thank you to the members who came to the meeting last night. If you did not, I would, and I know things come up and stuff, and we have 2 meetings in a row, and it's probably going to happen a few more times before town meeting. I would encourage you to watch the meeting. It was interesting.
Yep.
Already done.
Interesting.
Already done.
So, I'm just doing my part. All right, call the order of the pledge. First item on the agenda are minutes from March 28th meeting. I will have minutes for the last nights at the next meeting. I think, I don't know if 2 of us, but I took notes and stuff, so. So on the minutes for March 28th.
Mr. Chair, I'll forward a motion to accept the minutes for the advisory board meeting on, I'm sorry, what?
March 28th.
March 28th.
Second.
Second by Will Spring. Okay, motion made and seconded on the minutes. I give a few minutes to read them over. If there's any corrections, changes. If everybody's all set. Is everyone all set?
Yes.
All right. Accept the minutes for March 28th, 2019, Advisory Committee. Mike,
Yes.
Tony,
Abstain.
Amy,
Yes.
Lee,
Abstain.
Deb,
Abstain.
you were absent. Will,
Yes.
and yes.
People there?
All right. The next item is the reserve fund policy. Last meeting, I think, was the second time we've kind of seen this. We put it forward to this meeting to give people, members, a chance to look at it, decide if you wanted to merge the new proposed that I emailed to people, keep the original policy, merge one, update it, however you wanted to deal with it. Will Spring made some changes and emailed it to everyone. I noticed one thing in it, and it was in the old one too.
It should be in blue, and it appears that, from what I can see there, Okay.
Unless I didn't,
Because what I did is as a suggestion, taking from Jeff's document, on page 2, advisory committee decision, I put that in, I put the reference on the bottom, the reference to Mass General laws, and I made one other change, and it appears that for some reason, you got the incorrect document.
it's different from, well, it's like a different format from the old, in that, the first one. One thing I did notice on the second page, down at the bottom, it has references, well, the Mass General laws.
Yep.
If you go up 3 paragraphs, it starts off with the total reserve fund recommended appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, based, not to exceed 5% of the tax levy for the pending fiscal year, based on recommendation by Mass Department of Revenue. It's actually a Mass General Law,
Right.
Chapter 40, Section 6, that says it can be no more than 5% of the levy of the fiscal year preceding. So it would be, the max you can have is 5% of last year's levy. So that's the thing I noticed that would have to be changed. It's not a recommendation by Department of Revenue. It's referenced down here, Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section
Right.
6. So that would have to be, changed or removed.
So am I missing it, or is there any recommendation for a minimum in this revised copy, the one with the seal on top? Am I just not seeing it when I'm looking?
I did
Yeah.
not see it.
And
I don't
this,
like
this revised,
And, yeah, this one with the, yeah,
Yeah.
that one. Is there a minimum recommendation?
I
'Cause
did
I
not
feel like
see-
that's
I
important.
didn't read a minimum.
Okay,
It's the whole purpose why we did it.
right.
That just, that's per the Mass General Law, you can not exceed 5%. They don't, it
Right.
doesn't say, you know, a minimum.
Right, well, this, the one that you did, I think I saw a minimum in there.
Down on the front of the page, it
Yeah.
says appropriation to reserves.
Letter A, right.
Yes.
0.75%, but not exceed
Right.
5%.
And I was thinking of adding verbiage that would say the target appropriation range shall be no less than 0.75%.
Don't say
but not
target.
exceed 5%. In other words, so you wouldn't go somewhere,
Yeah.
somehow, somewhere wouldn't say, well, let's do 0.50.
Right, well, you'd eliminate the word
Specify,
target.
You know, no less than,
The appropriation range shall be no less than 0.75 and not greater than 5.
5%. for the
Right,
law.
I think the word target, Tony's right, that needs to come out, if you're gonna change that
Right.
way.
Which paragraph was that targeted?
It's right here, letter A,
Yep.
It's just,
appropriation to the
First
reserve.
page.
if you wanted to be more specific, we could do that, or just leave it as it sits.
You're on a different document.
I'm on the one Wilson.
One of the things I
Yes, this
didn't
is the
know
one Jeff sent.
at the
Well,
last
it doesn't
meeting, for
have
those
this
that
paragraph.
weren't
You want me
here,
to send it to you real quick?
was that
gonna send it
there's
to you real
communities that actually
Did Jeff
have
send it?
I'm gonna send it to you right
a
now.
couple things on other communities. Phillipston, who has a much smaller budget than us, if you go to their page and pull it up, for their reserve fund, they have a minimum of 2%. If you look at some other communities, and I did that, they actually have goals set for reaching 1%. I saw more at 1% than the 3/4. So I mean, could we end up starting in going 3/4 and gradually over the next couple of years go up to 1%? I think that's an option that we should look at and discuss. That seems to be more towards where other communities maybe.
We do that every year.
Pardon me?
We do that every year, so when we review it and we make recommendations like we did this year, we're like, we don't like that, we want it to be a little bit more.
And it will,
we're just giving the parameters of a starting point, so it comes to us not looking ridiculous, and we know where it comes from.
So next year's would automatically, the 75% would increase because of the 2.5% you add to the levy this year.
Uh-huh.
So next year, when you look at the 0.75 or whatever percentage you started,
Yes,
would be more than it is for this year.
sure. I mean, but that's,
And
that's an academic way of looking at it to say, yes, the numbers will increase. We're coming up with I think what Carter's frustration of, in proposing something was, it was all of the language that went into why we were recommending something more. And he said, does it help if I throw a number out there? What do you guys think of that? And I think for the most part, we all were like, yeah. It actually came out to where we were, the $50,000 figure. And because that was something that we attached onto, he was like, well, good. I'm glad that, 0.75 works.
I think if you look at past history also, the 0.75 currently is an appropriate number. And maybe the number we use for the next 4 or 5 years, because we haven't really expended any money. But to me, the reason to go from, say, 0.75 to 1.0 or 1.25 is because we've seen a big uptick in the need for that fund. But if we barely spend out of the fund, which is obviously the hope, then there's no reason to change the number.
The only thing my thought is, and not just today or next year, but with one thing, is the actuarial for the Worcester County retirement for like the next
Yep.
15 years
Yep.
or so.
Yeah, yeah.
They're gonna get to that fully funded.
Yep.
And I think, and as last night it was mentioned, you might look forward or expect to see another large increase in the school assessment from Narragansett. Monty Tech actually went back a little bit for us. Gardner, they're like over $1 million, so. But the fund that has not been touched or been used very little may, in the near future, come into play, be it the economy takes a little dip, state taxes grow a little stagnant, and then, state aid drops a little bit, which has happened. You may get to a point where you want to take some money from here to use it for, say, roads, for instance. You have the reserve fund to back up something. I think the rainy day fund is going to become more important and into play, and it may need to be larger than what it has been in recent history.
Yeah.
I would agree with that, but is the budget gonna support it?
That's my question.
Well, here's some background information that I gave
If you
last
come
time.
out of free cash, it could support it. Not out of taxation, but if you fund it out of free cash, and if you don't use it, it just rolls into free cash. It's kind of like a circle, but you have to make the initial move to start with, but.
Here's some background information for those folks that weren't here last time. One of the past members had given me a book, and he had kept track of the reserve fund over a number of years. And I looked at from 1994 to 2004.
2000.
The average, and you gotta remember that the amount for the budget for town was much smaller.
Yeah.
$40,000. There was some above that, and there was only one that I saw below that at $25,000, and they actually appropriated $32,000 more came up for the reserve fund. So they actually in 1994 they had $56,000.
Question.
Yes.
So, do you happen to know when we talk the 0.75, is that from the operating budget less debt service and insurance?
That's what he's proposing.
Do we happen to know the figures for those years? Do you think you could actually quickly look and say, 40,000 from that?
That might be difficult, because one of the things that I did say is that all the budget information was on cities and towns, because the accountant had a proprietary, accounting system. We didn't have Vadar.
Yeah.
And that was part of the problem in 2013 when he left, and we changed from that proprietary to Vadar.
So that number you just quoted was 40,000 from 2013.
No.
No,
Well, when was it from?
I went from 1994 to FY 2004. From 1994 to, and
So
as I,
it's 40 is an average?
Yes.
40 is an average.
So the point
If you want, I can end up giving you all of these, but the
Even if you
starting,
took the average and put it against the operating budget and it gave you a percentage, what I'm trying to do is kind of
I understand
meet
what
you-
you're trying to
yeah,
do.
Yeah.
And what the amazing part to me was, out of that 40,000, if I look at how much was used, it's,
Okay.
it's, most of it, it's in the high 30s to $40,000 that was used. In fact, in 1997, they supplemented with another 15,000, so they had $55,000 in the emergency reserve,
So
and they
does it-
used
does it give
40,000,
you-
almost 41,000.
Does it tell you what it was used for, though?
There is,
No,
yes,
I got his point.
there was a whole bunch of stuff,
At his point, but
for expenses,
to me, then.
interest on tax anticipation, public safety, Board of Health expense. There was a lot of expense that were noted on looking at and looking at this book. I mean, I was,
Yeah, I get where you're going, Will, because I certainly wanted to pull the budget actual from the last few months of last fiscal year to see what our expenditure rates were, because I think this, we've talked about this before in this committee. Are they spending the money that they've budgeted?
no,
They're spending under.
right, in FY
So why
18,
even have a historical higher reserve if they're not even meeting their budget goals?
here's the thing that bothers me the most.
Because they agree.
You sit and listen to the selectmen,
They have others.
and they say that all the departments are running, they're running a lean budget. And if you look at the actual budget sheet that's on the website and also in our book, only the front page that's gonna end up appearing at town meeting, every one of the budgets is higher than it was last year. So they can't tell me it's level
Page-
funded.
page 10.
Yeah, that sheet there. And that's the only sheet that ends up putting, for us to end up putting our recommendation. On the individual sheets, they don't. And I'm disappointed that we can't do that, because in some cases, I look at some of the budgets and I say, that's too high. They actually had over $600,000 in 18 above and beyond that they had for free cash. Does that say tight budgets? It doesn't to me.
I agree.
Now, if they came in and said 50,000 and they had to get a lot of transfers, I'd say, wow, that was a tight budget. And how many times did they have to come to emergency reserve? I mean, there's different things that I would look at as sitting on this thing for that length of time
Yeah.
and saying, let's see, what years was it 17 that we had 72 transfers at the end of the year? 16. We had 72 end-of-year transfers. That's the year that we got in trouble by when we ended up putting our report, and we reported all the end-of-year transfers, and they actually edited our report and wouldn't let us put in all the ones that we end up having to take and we sat for, what, 3-4 nights? To take and go through. So, I mean, that was a tight year budget for some departments, that there was a lot of end-of-year transfers. The last 2 years, there hasn't been any transfers, end-of-year transfers, to that extent. And in 18, like I said,
Yeah.
over $600,000, that doesn't spell tight budget to me. In 19,
We're looking at a fiscal year where that may very be a tight budget. I mean, we haven't talked about, we're in a tight spot right now. I would like not to do an override based on my conversations with people around town.
yep,
So how do you do that? You start trimming budgets.
exactly.
At that point, then you might need, if someone who's trimmed their budget you know, this is very hypothetical. If someone's trimmed their budget and they're, they, supplies or otherwise, we may need a reserve fund when we have that scenario.
That's exactly always been my point, is if you really have a tight budget, they should be coming to emergency reserve fund. In a couple of instances that I mentioned, when they should have come to emergency reserve, they were told not to. I mean, that was from a department head. He wanted to come to, because he had a problem with a fire truck, he was not allowed to. And he had a maintenance budget of $5,000, and it was much more than that. And they actually, I wouldn't say, let's put it this way, they used money from somebody else's budget, which I don't think is allowable,
Yep.
rather than
Well, I'm with you, man.
what I would want to say.
I'm with you, man.
And
so-
the same thing for the police car that was damaged. They should have come to emergency reserve. I mean, could we anticipate that police car getting damaged and out of service and not being able to pay for it? Well, no. I mean, come to us, and then later on, if we can collect from the insurance company, fine, go to the insurance company and collect it, but get that vehicle back on so you don't have to go through the process.
In answer to your question, Mike, about what was, like, 2004, what the reserve was versus the town budget, I looked at the annual town meeting.
Hit me.
The town, general fund, town budget, town charges is listed at $3,144,694. However, 29,000 of that was interest on,
The old.
chapter 90
The old,
and interest on a TAP note,
Okay.
tax anticipation note, and interest on, highway chapter 90 borrowing.
Okay.
But, so that's 3,144,000,
Yeah,
six.
call it 3-1 even.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what was the,
What was
Should I just use his average?
What was it, 40,000?
40?
was his average?
I would say I would say 40 to be on the safe side. That's probably on the lower side. I would say probably a little higher than that, but 40,000 was the average. And out of that 40,000, as I said, most of it, I would say, most of it ran 40,000, a little less than 40,000 to over 40,000 in some years.
What do you got?
1.2?
1.2% they said down here.
I've gone through your draft, and it's got a lot of procedural stuff, but I like the version that Jeff has, because it talks about minimum, maximum, and
too.
I really would like,
No, as I said, the only thing I didn't put on there, and I wanted to take and talk about it, and talk about other communities before we actually put it in,
Yeah.
whether we wanted to put the .75 in, or whether we wanted to take and put, 70.75 this year, next year 0.85, and get up to 1% or something like that. If you listen to what they said at that meeting in 2023, we're in trouble as far as budgetary. It's not sustainable.
I would say we're probably already in a little bit of
Well,
trouble here.
Let's put it this
I
way.
don't
It
understand
was-
your trigger, though. If we're increasing, it's not gonna, I mean,
It makes it worse.
Yes.
well, right, it's increasing up to 5 at some point, you're gonna hit 5%.
Yeah.
But what, I mean, does it just stay at 5%?
Yeah, you can't go above it.
It just,
That's
you know,
the state
See, I don't,
thing. It's 5%.
so,
Right, but does it,
the budget can't sustain that.
we're right now saying, Carter came to us and he said 0.75 of the operating budget. So he gets in the neighborhood and, of the 50,000, 40,000. To put that language in there, I think is good. Your suggested additional language to say increase. So you did 0.75 this year, you're gonna go to 1% next year, 1.25 the next year?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
All right, then I.
0.75 and work up till, say, 1%.
Okay,
We-
but-
We can choose anything as the minimum.
Okay.
And probably work up to 1%. And like I said, I saw a lot of communities at 1%.
Okay, got it.
I understand that,
Yeah,
but I think you need a trigger, like Mike was talking about, to say, okay, if we expend 85% of our budget that year, we goes up to 0.85. You just can't arbitrarily, you don't have a basis in fact to make it go to 0.85 next year. You just can't say, well, that's what we think. So if you start at 0.75, and then there's some type of formulaic equation in there that says, if advisory spends 85+% of the reserve fund, next year's will go up by, 0.1%.
That's if they're allowed to use the emergency reserve the way it was intended.
That's irrelevant, Will. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
That I absolutely understand, as long as they use the fund. But I'm also a believer in the town administrator and the department heads trying to solve an issue without coming to the reserve fund, as long as they do it within what's legal of the financial policy.
And that's what's spelled out in the proposed policy. And there's language specific to, the purpose is not to augment salaries.
Right.
The proposed
That's in
one is-
yours, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
in-
that's in
And
the version.
and by the way, I took that portion, like I said, and the one that I was supposed to send out to you, that was in there. I took and captured that in the references and put that in and said, hey, we can make these changes, and we probably should cap it as a minimum. One of the things I wanna point out,
I
before we
can
go,
say this,
let
did
me-
you have an old man moment and send the wrong one?
probably,
So what I do like, I like your idea of us having to possibly increase it, but we just need a mechanism that triggers that increase.
see, what also scares me is this, as far as emergency reserve. You've got an experienced administrator, okay? And he's got a fellow that works for him, and he oversees his work. On March 14th, and all of us got this. It's very clear, all of us got this. It states in there, on the almost on the bottom, salary increases emphasized, and it says emphasized, are generally not acceptable use of the reserve. And to have him make the comments he did when I sent him the policy, and he was aware of that, and he saw, he
Okay.
actually, a couple weeks before that, he sends us this, tells me, I'm not comfortable about how they go about asking for the reserve, whether they ask for it or don't ask for it.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this could be just a semantics issue, but salary increase versus a need for someone to work extra hours because someone is not doing that, I don't really call that a salary increase. I look at that as an unforeseen thing. Someone was injured, whatever, they can't work, so this person is gonna pick up those things. Yes, their salary it's not really increasing. They're being paid for the hours that they work, but if they were making $10 an hour, their salary's not increasing to $11 an hour. It's still that same rate. Really what they're asking
But the
for is
town
more
has already
hours.
passed, and you're overriding the town. The town has already approved the budget for 19 and a half hours at a certain salary. They didn't, they actually approved that salary for that individual, both individuals. And that's overriding what's at town meeting. And then, that's really clear
Okay,
that you're
if
not
that
supposed
is
to
the
override
case,
town
if
meeting.
that is the case, then I agree with you that you cannot override of something voted at town meeting. Then what really needs to happen is, and I was surprised because I was told it was gonna be on the warrant, it wasn't on the warrant, that it seems to me the timing that a transfer in the 1st of May would be sufficient to
I thought so
solve that
too.
issue.
I thought so too, that it would be, at the end of the year transfer within the department made more sense than come to emergency reserve.
But if town meeting says the assistant, in this case, can only work 19.5 hours.
Yep.
And that's voted on, then I don't believe the reserve fund could be used to increase those hours, period.
That's what-
Because you voted on,
That-
because,
Right,
and if you were decreasing, so if that office was gonna work, let's see, so 151 hours is a man-month. So say they work 225 hours between them. If the head is out because of surgery, are those hours movable? Do we devote it by hours for both positions?
salaried employee what salary an employee need? They usually get their money, don't they? If they have the sick time
Okay.
or vacation
Okay.
time.
All
So
right, no,
you're gonna
peace,
end up
peace,
using that money.
Peace.
See, the other thing that kind of stunned me a little bit is when we started to ask questions as to clarifying what that emergency reserve was for, okay? And rather than give us a better understanding of who and how much I mean, is that second person qualified to take and end up doing the accounting's work?
I don't think that's our discussion
No, but I'm
here.
saying, but that would end up, to me, that would say, okay, you have somebody else coming in. Is there another method to take and pay, if that's the case? Are they gonna end up getting paid only the assistant's salary, or are they gonna get paid the additional monies for doing the actual accounting? That's a different story, that's why I'm
Okay,
saying.
I hear you,
goes
but I
to
think we're way off
qualification.
topic. I
Yeah.
think we were looking at a minimum and a maximum
Yep.
for this account.
I agree.
And I think if we have something before us, then we can certainly discuss that, but I don't think there's anything before us at this time.
Okay,
To your other question, Mike, about how we spent the budget last year, the fourth quarter report from the accountant, from the expenditure side, there was $595,784.17. That will close to free cash unless, like, you get the special town meeting and you're gonna,
This is our
Yeah,
current
done
fiscal
anything.
year?
what's this?
This is our current fiscal year? Or last year?
No, fiscal 18,
Okay,
the end
right.
of the year report.
Exactly. That's what I was
And
concerned
on the
about.
revenue side, they collected 770,036.15 more than they expected. And that, you look at free cash, and that's like, I don't know, mil two, mil three. I think there's, I think I added it up and looked at the final free cash number, and there was like a couple 100,000.
Yeah.
And I didn't go look for I just looked at, there's 500, almost 600,000 left
Yeah.
over from expenses. To me, my
Right.
first
So
look.
there's
it-
three things there, yeah.
First thing is, that's not from frugal, tight budgeting expenses. I don't think you can
Yeah.
squeeze that much out. I think it's either a combination of they were really tight and there was, more bigger cushion in there than they needed.
Yeah.
Or it was just a real big cushion put in to reach a stated goal of 5% free cash.
So we have three things. I think there's a path in there to
Which-
be able to say,
The override
based on
is
expenditure
almost
rates,
right there.
carryover free cash, and the proposed minimum, I think there's a path to do some kind of formula in there where you said, in years where you have an expenditure rate of 88, like 90% or more, then we shall use the minimum of 0.75. Expenditure rates below 90%. You see where I'm
I see
I'm
where
getting
you're
the
going.
language?
Yeah.
I think, because that's a way to tie it to something, really, you talked
Yes.
about a lot, Will, and I think the spirit of what you were talking about, you get there because you tie it to something that fluctuates within the town. So whether it's free cash amount or, we can talk about that. I thought the expenditure rate, because it gives a percentage expended near the end of the year. So at the end of the year, you look at the assessor's office. The assessor's office is at 95% expended. We say, yay, here's a certificate of appreciation from the advisory board. You met a
right.
threshold that is acceptable. But if the town as a whole is under whatever percentage we said is a allowable rate, we wind up tying that reserve fund because it's an indicator of just not budgeting correctly.
Right.
And see what
like that a lot.
what our collection rate is
Right.
for
So like a
for
fourth thing
property
in there, yeah.
taxes, because it's, like, if you're below 95%, you talk to DLS, you go to the conference, or you call the DLS Municipal Bureau and stuff, you're in, like, if you're in 90% collection rate, you're in bad territory.
You are.
If you're below 95%, you're below, your levy limit. Say, and I'm making these numbers up, people. If your max levy is $10 million, if everybody paid their property taxes
You get
every
10.
quarter,
Yep.
at the end of the year, you would have collected $10 million. And the state allows you for some reason to say, well, you have 10 million to spend.
Right,
If you only collect 95% of that, but you count 100% of that,
to expend,
you did that at home, you know.
you're in trouble.
It's like counting on overtime, that overtime doesn't come. What
So-
happens?
It's the scene in A Wonderful Life when they got
So-
mama dollar and baby dollar.
Generally, if you're like at 90, 96, 97%, the DOR, DLS, they consider you're in good territory.
So Will, I just wanna make sure you understand, I agree with increasing it, but we just need that trigger, that.
Oh, yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I wanted to
like
take and
that.
throw that out as a conversation that we should be looking at that. And by the way, my theory has always been this. You change it to 0.75 this year, that doesn't mean we don't review this whole process, like, the policy again next year and say, okay, now we're gonna, after doing some analysis, we're gonna end up stepping it up every year. I mean,
Stepping it
Yeah.
down.
hey, listen,
It's exciting. I think
you gotta
we
be
figured it
looking
out. I
at-
think we figured it out.
I think so.
you gotta be looking
Yeah.
at this. I mean, when Jeff brought up the fact that below 95%, you're in trouble. We were in trouble for a number of years. That's why we had so much outstanding money, and we had houses that we ended up, for taxation, we had that company come in a number of years ago, and we got a small windfall. I can't remember, over $500,000?
Talger, they basically, homes that were gonna go into tax title,
Right,
and instead of the town going through
They
the
went to a
trouble
company.
and expense, they buy those and pay you the taxes.
right.
And then the owners now owe that company the
Right.
taxes and interest.
Instead of the
And if
town.
you don't pay, they take you to land court, and if they end up getting the property, then they sell it for a
They go sell
profit.
it and that's how they make money.
Or they collect the taxes and the interest of the late fees. It takes it off the town. They looked at a lot of the properties, and some of the stuff they backed away from, like some of the old paper mill, or the old
Yeah,
Temple
American
Store and
tissue,
stuff. They backed away, cause they said, we take that, it'd be a long legal process to get it, we might not ever get it, so it's like.
that's why the town has never
losing money.
gone.
So, they didn't take that. I think there was about 900,000 in total,
We beat this horse.
and they took, just a little under
90 to
500,000, but.
You give them 1.5, 80, 100, you get them. So what I, based on that, just throwing some numbers out there, like you were saying, for a previous FY expenditure rate of 90 to 100%, 100% unrealistic, you're gonna do a next year percent reserve of OpEx of 1.5%. But that's a reward for actually expending dollars, right? Because they're actually meeting their budget goals, so we can actually put more into reserve. Or do I have it? Do I have my scales?
No, you get it backwards.
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on, let me,
Yes.
got my pencil. That's
Point, so it'd be 0.75 for that low.
And by the way-
Correct, 0.75. So if you had an expenditure, a previous year, a previous FY expenditure rate, 80 to 100%, you give them 1%.
By the way, just
Less than 79, 1.5.
Just
So
as
I
a
think you
reference,
also
if
gotta
you look
put
back at
transfers in
the actual financial policy that the advisory set, and we tried to work with the selectmen back in 13 and 14, we actually had for collection rate as 95%, which means that you put it out there, and it's up to management to take and end up working with the employees, which is the collector and the treasurer, to take and end up being proactive on getting that money and getting, see, one of the things that wasn't
Yeah,
happening.
I'm confused why you're bringing up that. If we're talking about, the reserve fund is meant to plug holes in the operating budget.
Right,
So the indicators or judgment would be, how are those departments executing those dollars? If they're consistently over budgeting, we don't want to reward that by having a large reserve fund that doesn't get used.
that's correct. But the reason I mentioned that is
Yeah.
to having that as a goal is to take and get away from those lean years so that we don't have to have that they can end up having a larger reserve. You wanna balance the reserve fund for the good years when you're collecting 95 plus,
Yeah.
and for the
That's why
bad
you
years
set the minimum.
below 95, you're gonna have to have a much larger reserve.
Right, but that's why you set a minimum.
And I
But
think,
unfortunately, you're always kind of lagging a year behind, based on what Mike said of
Yeah.
expenditures.
Yeah.
You're lagging a year behind, but
I think a good thing would be, and you kinda gotta like, well, we can roll with this and see what the 19 end of the year is. And if there's another year, if we have 19 and there's another 500,000 or more left over in the expense side, then that tells me there's less of a chance
Too
to
much
use
fluff.
the reserve.
Yeah.
And
How much did you say?
I'm saying if
From
there's like
last
a
year?
500,000 or more
Yeah.
left over in 19,
Kick in the pants that would be to the town.
Yeah.
When we're
I was
throwing
gonna
an
say, if you have that
override.
much
I know,
left
I mean,
over.
and 18 had 600.
see what I'm saying, Lee?
So the revenue's kind of
Yeah.
unpredictable because you don't, like I said, you might jump up to like 98% collection
Yeah.
property tax rate, income, and you might get,
Oh,
you
it's
never
the other
know,
side of it.
because,
I got what
because
he's
when
saying.
we go to town
But
meeting and
I
we
think
vote
the
on this budget, the
methodology-
state isn't even, they're not even solid on their numbers, it can change. And
Right.
that's why there's a few communities that have one town meeting a year, because that's just the way they budget, and they're real conservative and stuff, so they're not worrying so much on, if the state aid drops 100 grand, big deal. If it comes in a little bit more, that's just free cash.
Mhm.
But most towns have an annual town meeting, and then they have a special town meeting in the fall, because the state usually finalizes their numbers June, July, sometimes August,
And you have to augment the
even
budget.
though they're supposed to, so then you adjust, if state aid and stuff drops a little bit, you move your numbers back, and if you can move them up, you move them up, or you finalize stuff, because now you'll have the solid, state
Right.
numbers.
So I think that, I think this issue is still open. We still have more discussion to do as far as how we're gonna come up with a percentage and,
Well, I like Jeff's. I think we tweaked the language. What I did with the version that Will sent out, I went through every single thing and said, what's the main point of this? And I tried to tie it to what Jeff had, and I think for the most part, the two were pretty close.
Right, that's why,
It was a lot of
unfortunately-
easy stuff, like
unfortunately,
you're not
the
gonna
parts
expend.
that didn't come out to you were the parts on the second page with a reference.
Yeah.
And where the verbiage is, not for salary and stuff like that, that one section, I actually put that in the document, that you didn't get the document that I ended up.
It's okay. Well, so
Recommending.
if you can, Mr. Chair, if you can indulge me for 30 seconds or less. So the draft that I got and I realize it didn't have the extra stuff in there, but under policy, here are the main points. Tell me if they're in Jeff's version. Request that it be alerted, okay, so there's a provision about alert. Plan to be present, meaning the people that requesting it have to be present. Open meeting law, that we're complying with open meeting law.
Yep.
Excess of appropriation, you can't have expenditures excess appropriation, they can't ask for more than that. Deplete other funds, they have to deplete their normal budget,
Right,
we talked about that. Replace the town meeting or special town meeting that it is already voted against. Did everyone follow what I'm doing? Basically pulling out those high points. Next one, increase the amount requested for its budget. That's based on the following year. So if they were in error and had to go to the reserve, that it's a legal expenditure. No transfer request after July 15th.
it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no direct expenditures. You can't expend out of that, it has to be for a shortage within that. Submitted using the attached form. Does Jeff's meet that?
The only other one that I put in there was from Jeff's, okay, onto ours. Like I said, that second page, from C down to, all the way down to references, I actually put that into the one we presently have. Why did I do that? Because I saw advisory, and it spelled out some stuff,
Yeah, the definitions.
definitions,
Yeah.
and then the
Some people put it in the
disposal.
beginning, some people at the end.
Disposable or the residual balance.
Yeah.
that's very critical because what happened one particular year is it went to, I think, special town meeting, and they grabbed our money for other stuff rather than coming through us. Now, if you have,
No, that was a town meeting vote
right,
to transfer money from the reserve, which is perfectly legal.
right,
which
it was legal,
From the reserve fund, and it was in 2015, I believe.
yeah.
Do you think you have a formula?
It went to multiple places.
Two,
Yeah.
I believe.
See, one of the things that I believe in is that if, as an example, you know you have to spend, snow and ice is deficit spend. But one of the things that you have to do is you either have to put it into next year's budget, or you have to or you have to take and end up getting rid of that deficit in the year that you're in. Well, if you look at a lot of communities, what they do at the end of the year, they will end up doing end-of-year transfers, or they will end up, because it's unforeseen, because you can end up in unanticipated and unforeseen, above and beyond what's budgeted for snow and ice. I mean, that's taking and pulling those two definitions pretty hard and do a transfer to snow and ice, so that you get rid of the deficit and you're not going into the next year. That, to me, is a good use of the emergency reserve if there's money to cover it at the end of the year. Because now you're not carrying a deficit over that you have to reduce the budget, and you're getting rid of it in the year that it was done. So it actually is really beneficial all the way around.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Did I explain it all right? Being an old guy, it takes me a while to take and figure these things out.
I think I'm gonna work on some formula stuff, you know, whether I get it done in this meeting or next, but I think that a lot of your stuff is covered in Jeff's. I just wanna probably give it the additional side by side. And like you wrote it like a bill, you know, like a federal bill. All of the instructions and definitions are way at the top. I mean, if we wanna do it like that, that's fine.
The reason I tend to take and want to end up doing the one that we presently have and putting those things in is this. In looking at other communities, the one that Jeffrey pulled it from, and it's a small community, number one, Standishville. I have nothing against Standishville. They have some good things in the thing. But if you look at other communities, and I looked at a lot of other communities, and as I said the other time, if you look at our policy, the one that we voted on and presently have, there are more communities that use the same wordage as what we have. I'm not against changing hours and putting some additional stuff in there to make clarity, especially after this year, and getting pushback from the administrator, a lack of his understanding of what we had out there. I looked at Dartmouth, I looked at Air, I looked at Boylston. Those pretty well had the same thing as ours. And by the way, that was where we pulled a lot of the stuff into ours. I'm saying let's supplement the one we have with some of the stuff that's in Jeff, so we're not changing it entirely. All we're doing is enforcing it and making it stronger as a policy.
Okay.
That's my recommendation.
And it was by annual town meeting vote in 2015 to take 27,000 from the town's reserve fund for the unemployment and group insurance, which is health insurance.
Right.
To supplement that. They transferred, town meeting vote
That
transferred,
was the fall town meeting.
no, annual town
Annual
meeting.
town meeting.
They
And by the
took
way,
27,000 to cover the health insurance and the unemployment.
and by the way, that was something that they could have come to us and asked for from the emergency reserve. And that would have been a good thing to for them to come directly to the advisory and say, it's unbudgeted, unanticipated. We're spending much more for these two than what we anticipated and budgeted for.
But it still came out of that fund, they just did it at town meeting.
That's correct.
In which you may like wait longer, it tells me they kind of waited longer
Right.
to come for that. So I would be inclined, I would have to look at the
It
numbers.
was close.
But it would stretch that out, the dollars that were in there, stretch them out as far as they could. Where they could have just, where they could have come like a month early, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they were trying to, squeeze it and then realized, that ain't gonna work.
Right,
Yeah, they could have come to us sooner, and it would have relieved the problem much sooner.
But it's, like I said, I would have to go back and look at the expenditure
Yeah.
reports to see exactly how much was in
I'm
there
just-
at that time.
I'm confused about the timing of that, like the purpose and otherwise. You don't have to explain it to me
Okay,
anymore. I
yeah,
think we need to move
yeah,
through this, but I'm a little confused about that. It's okay.
see me after class, Michael.
What?
See me after class.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So you are going to,
So that language where I tied, I think a little bit of thought, how I can tie, collection rate and expenditure. He and I just shared what it was at the end of FY18 to kind of get what is reasonable, and, a lot of our departments were, what would you say, about 80%? So I'd like to kind of slide that scale, because I think 100% is unachievable. I think everyone can agree. So I'll work on that language, and then I'll put that out to you guys.
Yeah, you could go back a couple years, it wouldn't be hard to go back 17, 16, yeah, just a
For
couple.
budget, yeah, the budget, for the information that I know that's available to us, the budget versus actual was the best in terms of trying to gauge how they were doing for expenditure. And
Right.
so that May one, now it doesn't account for gifts, cause the gifts was like at 40% expenditure, whether, cause those roll. So I would have to basically put that in the language.
Okay,
I think we're there. I think once we get that, we have
Okay.
something that actually
so
makes sense.
next meeting,
for our next regular meeting.
Yes, please.
All right.
And that's my due out.
Alrighty. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
All right, the next thing is, and we've been discussing this for a while. For this committee to have access to the town website to post things on the advisory tab. We now have that, myself, I have a username and a password, and Lee has a username and password.
That's awesome.
There's also, online training, the link, emailed out, and they will, if need be, or maybe when the dust settles, if anybody has any trouble with it, and this is like, a lot of departments are gaining this access. I think they were gonna do some additional, training with it, if need be, but, we have the access, so when we get this policy, we can put this right on the website, and perhaps that meeting, we can vote to take some of the stuff down that is really old and not really relevant, any longer.
I would recommend we put our policies that we have there until we change them and get rid of some of the, like you said, the old stuff.
I agree. It's gotta be a place where we can go to. We have to be on common
But
ground.
we have that,
Yeah.
access now, and like I
Awesome.
said, that's been
And if you look
coming
at some
for a
other
while.
communities, they have a nicer layout than what we had, as far as links to certain documents, et cetera. It's a shorter thing. I think an excellent example, I think Rutland was one community, if you look at their, I don't know about their new website, but I know the old one, it listed certain, by just per category, it says, emergency reserve, this, that, budget for this year, that year, and what you did is you click on it and it went to a link, and it didn't clog up the page, but it was it explained what you had to go for right on that little box, bing, and you could put a lot in those boxes. I think it was like 4 or 5 wide and about 3 or 4 deep. depending on the community as to what they had.
So, the important thing is we have the access now, so we can, have you gone on it yet?
Yep,
Yeah.
I was on today.
Do you guys have the ability to
I
edit?
started to do it, I got on, so I said, well, we
You got the edit, you can edit
works.
now?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
couldn't before, as I said.
Yeah, no, now you can.
that's-
Yeah,
it's,
no, so everything from the mission statement at the top, all that's editable, adding documents, it's all editable.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that hard to do, but we definitely need to figure out what we wanna do. The old documents, personally, what I'd like to do, is not get rid of them, but archive them.
Yeah.
So maybe we come up with some foldering scheme based off of year, and just put things in the right place. So if people wanna see what happened in 2014, they can
go.
find, it's not right there, but,
Yeah, well.
but again,
archive
we'll,
it.
we'll figure this out as we go along, so not gonna worry about it quite yet, but yes, we can do that.
Because even the old version, when we were doing that, they said to archive anything.
Yeah, yeah.
That way there you could pull it up.
Yeah, so we won't,
No,
we
I
won't
agree
get
with
rid of anything, but
Right.
we'll put things where they should be, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes more sense to put it.
But the important thing is that we now have that access that's
Mhm.
Yep,
been
correct.
like a
Great.
year in the making, or a little actually longer, but. All right. Some of these agenda things, I like the Narragansett school budget and the 2020 budget and the annual town meeting warrant and the ballot questions. I put on there in anticipation of any action or anything that may have happened from last night's meeting. Right. I didn't wanna wait, and if nothing happened and nothing changed, then you can just skip over it, or,
It's
you
a
know,
great, it's a good
it's just
placeholder.
harder to add it,
Yeah.
you know, rather than waiting another week or 2 weeks, we can do it. So,
Can I sum up one thing that,
just a second,
Okay.
okay, what do you, what do you
I'll just,
sum up with?
in just summing up the
Same as,
I know.
some things on the budget and the warrant, is that there's things that are gonna change, and one of the things that we have to end up doing is that, and I mentioned this, is the school override is pretty substantial, as you heard Mike say. If we end up looking at 18, and the fact that we had so much money, and the fact that we're running even now with excess money, and we could end up with a reserve, maybe there's an opportunity, and I say an opportunity, and we're tasked with looking at individual budgets, not the overall sum, and cutting something out of the budget that they can end up reducing the amount that the town is going for, so that we can use that to take and end up reducing the amount of override. And I wish the school would do the same thing.
Okay,
I mean, but at this point, if they got a certified budget, it ain't gonna happen.
well, so I believe everybody that was at the meeting, and those that weren't, I got copies and gave them to everybody. There was some back and forth discussion, everybody had seen the meeting and stuff. There was back and forth discussion about the override and the things that the school, you know, could reduce, like, Chris Casimir, the superintendent, stated they could do without a Spanish teacher. How much would that equate? You know, it's, so there are things that in there that they, by their own admission, that they could reduce, and reduce that amount of that override. Are they going to do that? I don't think so. I just don't see.
It's not in their best interest. I
Well,
mean,
no, if you go
more
out
to
and
Julie-
present
Julie
something-
Richards' point of, you know,
present
how do you build a
something-
community that has a viable school district, where you just start slicing stuff out, like the band and Spanish teachers?
Well,
You wind up lighting the fuse for something worse.
My thought is, if you go through these meetings that they're having and making the case with a
Yeah.
joint meeting and everything, and having good discussion at it at the meeting that they certified their vote on, you make the case for all of these things,
Right.
and then you get to, you're at 2 steps or 1 step from the finish line, you go, well, you know what? We can back this down to, 5, because we can cut this, this, and this, and this.
Hmm.
So the next time you come in and you say you need something, you have a credibility issue there, and I just don't see them going backwards. And Yes, I disagree with some things, and there are other things that they could cut out that are more wants than needs, but, the town is trying to do the same thing, go, move, and I think we're going big too much, but, you don't wanna start getting too thin again, where you put
Yeah.
yourself in, I think the biggest hurdle is both entities getting maybe more in the middle. But certainly, like I said, I wish we would have the end of the year numbers before we had the final vote on the school, because then it would be more of a thing to back the override down, because some of the money is there. Because that's a hard thing to support, to go for the
All you can do
override.
is
The
take the best
community's
snapshot
gonna
you
have to
can.
make the decision, they're either gonna do the override, or they're gonna go the 112 through, and if they
I was
do it,
gonna ask you,
then
that
I
procedure
believe that
sounds
the-
pretty
the-
damn
the
bad.
Templeton should try to take it all the way, and go to December 1st, when the commissioner from, Department of
DOE.
Elementary Secondary
DOE or
Education,
DOR that
Desi.
does that.
Desi, comes in,
Department of
They come
Elementary and
in,
Secondary
or
Education.
his representative, and they look at, and it's not good for anybody, from the fact
Right.
that they look at the school, they look at the town, the school committee just can no longer just move money around and stuff, they have to get approval from the commissioner.
Right.
And then he basically tells you, this is the budget. He tells
Right.
the town, tells the school, and says, guess what? This is your budget.
Right.
This is the schools,
It's
that's
a
what
mini
you're getting.
I've
The town's
described it
gonna
as a
give
mini
this.
receivership.
And there's something in the,
No, it's not receivership.
It's a mini
it
receivership.
kinda- yeah, because,
Yeah.
no, somebody comes in and tells you what you're gonna
Right.
do.
Right.
And there's something in there that even though you have to pay that, it speaks to, it doesn't mean the town, agreed with or approved the budget, it just means it's what you have to pay. And then it's how you pay that is up to you.
How
And you're,
can we avoid this? What
you're
can
6
we
months
do?
into the fiscal year.
I think the town would be
So-
better served if we would end up having compromises by the town, reducing the budget, and the school, and still probably end up with you're gonna end up having some level of override. You probably
Potentially.
have a much better chance, if that happened, for both compromise down, to take and end up passing an override and said, okay, we've made some cuts on both sides now, and this is what we really need. You probably got a better chance, because right now, at least what I'm hearing, and like you, Mike, is that
It's,
people are not looking forward to taking and end up passing this. It's gonna, I'm hearing a lot of no's.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that they don't want a good school system. It's like, you're coming to my pocket and you're taking out money, especially some of the newer homes that have come up. If they're stretched and their mortgage goes up, their mortgage payment goes up because their equity, their escrow goes up,
Yeah.
and they have kids, that's a slam in their pocketbook. I mean, even your older population, I'm concerned about young people that have kids in town and a mortgage up to the hilt, I mean, there's some of us in here are probably sitting very well salary-wise, we're not gonna worry about it, but believe me, there's a lot of people in this community that are not sitting as well financially, either seniors or younger people. And that's my concern, is we need to try to balance that out so that we're not killing either one of those, and that we can end up still being financially stable in our community and get what everybody needs.
So in 17, fiscal 17, do you know what the expenditure rate was? We're like,
I would have to go
That
find.
made them both.
That's a little hard because,
huh? No,
You
the
guys
reason-
both felt overwhelmed with that question.
that's a
The,
little
the,
hard.
reason, the reason I ask that is because it would be great to have the 19 expenditures, but we're not gonna have it all, so we could do, because I think you have a great idea there, Will. So Mike and I looked, and expenditures for 18 were in the low 80s, let's say, okay? So they over budgeted themselves and underspent. Great, that's a good thing, however, if you find them doing that a trend, then maybe there is money in the revenue to reduce that.
That might be a little hard to
override.
get, Tony. The reason I say that is you'd have to go back to the audit because that's when they finished the audit in 17, and that was a roll-up from 13 to 17, and it was a deficit, a surplus.
No, that was 13, 14,
Well,
15,
well,
and 16. 17 is
17
separate.
oh, that's- oh, yeah,
17 is
17, okay.
separate by
Right, so,
itself.
so what I wanna know is the low expenditures of 80%-ish, whatever it is,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that just an aberration?
I can
Right.
find the
It was
end of the
only
year for
May
17.
31st. Yeah.
I'll find the end of the year 17.
Okay.
I should have
I
that.
think we
Those
have
are
surplus.
I mean, I'm
helpful.
sure
We
I
can
could,
say
we
what
could
is a
probably
track
email
record
Kelly
for-
and she probably has a spreadsheet she could send out to us, but, it's good, if you have something like this, then it's hard to sit there and do something like you want, Will. But
Yeah.
if you see something where the expenditures are down here, but their budget's up here, well,
Yep.
then maybe we
Like I
need to
said,
take a look at things.
I don't think you would find the whole 800,000, but I think you could, if that's the trend, then you could probably find half,
Yes,
Yeah.
which
And-
you
and
could
having the
take to the
town-
school and maybe see,
and
see
maybe
if
they
you
could find some more efficiencies, and it's easier to ask for $200,000 or $300,000 override than it is $1 million.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Could,
It
could I expand on what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
So, I think it's, the federal government's going through this right now. I think President Trump said to all his departments and agencies, cut 10%. We've seen some of the fallout for that. Certainly Betsy DeVos has been hammered for trying to cut her 10% where it's coming from. But in lean fiscal times, if we take a look at that to say, what can we direct a cut? You know, I know, just looking at the numbers, we've got 17 million is our total budget. 9.6 of that is the general fund. Of that 9.6, 2 million of debt service and another 2 million of
Yep.
insurance. Everything else is the stuff that we're talking about, like, so the 80%
Yep.
and things. If we wind up as advisory committee say, we don't want the override, we've got to try and do this, we have to find the money. Do we say a 10% cut? We recommend that we go back through
That's
the
a little
budgets.
drastic, by the way.
Oh, it's extremely drastic. I went through page 10, the top sheet that you had.
Yeah.
For some departments, that's like catastrophic.
Right, so.
You would have no choice but to eat into personnel
Right.
line items. It's unattainable.
Right. So I
But
had
what
asked,
combination can we
Yeah.
figure it out? And I just want to add one more thing on top of that. If we can't figure out a way to do that, how can we sell this to the community where it's a positive? Some of the things that, I mean, going out and talk to people, it's, that override isn't the only subject. People are absolutely out of their mind about the state of I know the DPW just started this week to go out and sweep and fill potholes, but potholes are a concern. Well, look at our capital planning. We have the hot box to get purchased this year. Maybe we can try and tell them something good and say, good things are happening. We have a bond rating. We had free cash that was able to get all these capital items. What if we sell the good news story and say, now here's the bad news. Our school, Dr. Casavant, couldn't have, the point of contention last night was the 300-something thousand for the reorganization. He couldn't have foreseen some of those things, as I recall him when he sat in front of our board. We have to try and incrementally explain these things to say, this is why we're at an override situation. So here's the good, hey, we failed to find the money, but here's all the good things that we're doing.
That's nice, but I don't think something like that is going to end up
It's
changing
gotta count for
people's
something,
minds.
though. It has to count for something. Good news needs to be, people love to say, oh, we're always saying bad things are on the news. Here are the good news stories. We do have some good news stories. Just unfortunate that we may be in an override year.
Now, my brother-in-law comes from Springfield.
Yeah.
He stopped in Cumberland's across the street.
Mhm.
I mean, I've talked about the community, but what he heard between two people, I'm not gonna mention what he did, was very negative about the administration. I'm talking about in that office right there. It was very negative. overall, I mean, and this is just two people, and he didn't even know these people. And he's saying, cause he came to the house after, that's one of the reasons I didn't, I had a out-of-town company and out of state. And he heard that, and he was asking me what was going on, that they can hear that level of negativity in a public place, basically, between two people in the town. And I don't know who he talked to, but it was between two gentlemen, and that's.
But I think you need to be careful with that, because you don't know the context, you don't know their background, you don't know, is there some kind of issues, there's so
Well,
much,
I
just
didn't get into
overhearing
I didn't get into specific
No, but just,
reason.
but just overhearing the conversation, there could be more to the story, so I think you gotta be careful when you say stuff like that.
That's why I didn't get into specific. I just said the management, they were critical of management. I didn't say who or what or whatever. That was a comment that he got out of it.
So I think there are good things happening, to come off of what Mike's saying. I think there are lots of good things happening for the school. I think the school committee and Dr. Cassavant, I think they've worked very hard with a lot of things that were out of their control 3 fiscal years ago. You know, I think that they've tightened things the way they are. I don't know if I sympathize too deeply because of my track record as a teacher, having worked in a school. I know lots of teachers. I have children and all of those things. I guess my question is, if, let's say we decide to adopt something like what Mike is talking about and say, I know it's not going to be 10, but 10% across the board. Who makes that decision? And that decision has to be made in the next week, because the select board is going to certify the budget next Wednesday at their meeting.
Well, wait a second.
Isn't that what I heard last night?
Yeah.
Right,
didn't
they,
get last
they
night,
certify their budget, okay? Now, as I said last week, Mass General Law basically says you have an advisory committee that makes the recommended budget.
Oh,
the-
okay. So
the
then we can
recommended
come back
budget
and-
at annual so we can end up recommending a budget at annual town meeting, and this is falls into us,
Okay.
to take and scrutinize that line by line and said, okay, here's what some of it is we probably agree, some of it we probably don't agree, line by line. But we said, here is our recommended budget from the advisory. And you present that to the town. Now, the town has choice. They can end up going with the selectmen, they can end up going with ours, or they can end up actually making right on the floor,
Yeah,
is making
okay.
changes, and this has happened in the past. This has happened in the past.
But
I mean,
if I may echo on what
Yep.
Amy was saying, I think if you look at some of the things where Dr. Cassavant and his business team have vastly increased Medicare income, so they've actually, they're not a for-profit school, but they have really exhausted a lot of resources to bring more money into the school to keep that override down even higher than it could be. It could be much higher if they weren't getting those
I'm
funds
not
from
disagreeing with
Medicare.
that, I'm just saying that somehow you have to take and end up trying to balance that out so you can get an override to go through.
Yeah.
So, Mike, I like the idea. I think the challenge that we have, though, is 2 things. One, getting news out to people in general, whether good or whatever, is exceedingly difficult. And the second thing, as Will had mentioned, there are just some people who, they're just not gonna be able to afford it. So,
And there-
fully understand
Yeah.
that. So, you know, to everyone's point, what if any kind of middle ground can we find here? And I don't know.
It's gonna be a difficult sell. I mean, if
So
you talk to any,
I guess one question I would have is,
Yeah.
if the override doesn't pass
Yep.
the first time, and we're saying that we don't have the numbers before the vote, would we have the numbers before any potential second vote?
what do you mean by this, the
Well-
numbers, that they could pass the
Of-
override,
Of their budget expenditures?
to spend to take an actually, that is what happens when they go into the district meeting, when Phillipston comes in.
Okay.
And that's
so-
what happened last time. Unfortunately, this is what happened. And I think it turned a lot of people off. Is that when you looked at the audience, quite a few of them were Phillipston, and I heard this after, is they ended up controlling our override, and there was a lot of animosity, and they were really pissed that it went that way.
They get a
So-
vote.
Show
Now,
up.
they were at fault for not showing up,
And
guaranteed.
The reason I'm bringing it up is, again, if people are watching
They had
this,
to break the vote.
they need to be
Right.
aware of what potential outcomes could occur. So if we don't know the numbers the first time, and they're made aware the second time,
Right, and if
What
they
could
come the
possibly
second
happen?
time and they vote the same way, fine. If they don't come at all, then they better not bitch like they did the last time. And by the way, my gut feeling is that that's what's gonna happen again, because of the timing of when that meeting is. It's usually later in the year, in the summer months, when people are on vacation.
I sent the end of the year 17
Thank you.
to everybody, and
Okay.
you can see, I quick glance, some of them are at like 90%, 94, some are at 80. But anyway, you can have that. You should have it.
Great.
yep, got it.
I got it for some reason, so.
What's the,
You sent it to yourself?
Oh, yeah, when I send it out of,
Right.
the advisory email, yeah, it goes to everybody.
Six.
Well, it's the only way I get any email. I'll feel left out if I don't mail
Right.
myself.
You doing ballot questions in on it, Mr. Chairman?
So, look, I
Did we
mean,
get any valid questions?
are we kind of still in a little bit of open discussion about the budget?
Yes.
So, if we did it across the board cuts, 5%, 10% or something, if just the OpEx were to be the bill payer for the shortage, they would have to do a 20% cut to make 988,000.
Yep.
There's no way,
I mean, you just can't.
you would wind up losing whole positions and otherwise, and I don't think that we can cannibalize ourselves that way. Would we ask the school, hey, we're making,
You would have to do that.
like, if we say, we can try and make, that's the number, okay. Wow, okay. Well, that's with the override.
Yep.
It'd be 6.4 if it
That's
wasn't.
what they say their budget
So if we tried to figure out a way, again, we're trying to find paths to no override, at least without going into the police officer discussion. If we said our departments can handle no more than 5%, and even looking through page 10, what that impact would be, can we go back to the school and say, can you meet us? Can you cut 5% from your budget? He has what, 6 scenarios? I know their
They
budget's
had
already been
6, yeah.
certified.
They said
Yeah.
six, and
Six
then they went to
scenarios.
7. They
And
went to
say-
another one.
Can you cut 5%? Or meet us there?
And that's what would happen. There's an opportunity for that. If you go to town meeting and town meeting votes
Oh, I can do
down
Gotta use that
the
7.
school number,
That's what they're saying they're operating as.
it goes back to the school committee and they have a chance to
Right.
consider a different number or send the same one right back
Right.
to you. And then you get that back and you gotta have a hold another special town meeting to try to do that. And I think in 13, they did it, annual town meeting, 1, 2, I think they had 3 more special town meetings.
Yep. We have
And then it
lots.
was in August, I
Yeah, it was-
think, when they had the joint meeting.
Yep.
'Cause I just
I mean, is
been
it
back
feasible
and
that
looked
we're
at-
even having this discussions? Is Carter gonna watch this and like have an aneurysm?
There was
I
a
hope
comment
not.
made last night.
Say again?
There was a comment made last night about departmental budgets and not wanting to make any cuts because departments are still trying to get back up to levels that they were at previously because they had been cut so deeply a few years ago. I don't know if anybody else caught
But
that.
I think the counterpoint to that is, if we go into that mini receivership, as I was saying, we're already gonna feel bad things happen. When the town shuts down, when we had that, how long ago was that?
What year was that?
13.
Was that 6 weeks?
in
13.
That was
The
in
end of
14.
2014.
And how much time was that?
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
7 weeks.
Did any of our town employees get paid during that time?
They got unemployment.
Okay.
And there was.
Which
there
we
was-
pay for, that benefit.
That's, we had to take and pick up that benefit.
So it's like, 6 or half dozen of the other. We wind up saying, hey, make responsible budget cuts or suffer the consequences because the town's gonna send us, you know, in whatever direction.
And then you're forced to, you either do it, you know, town meeting, you either have a town meeting
Yeah.
and tell the town, say, hey,
I'm
okay,
trying to
now
get to
we
a
need-
reasonable cut, you know, where we
Right.
say, what if we did 3% and the school winds up trying to do something?
So I had asked Adam, I talked to Adam some time ago.
Yeah,
About, you know, I don't wanna say a tax on the departments, it's the term that we use where I work, is there's money taken sorta off the top for eventualities, it's complicated to explain. But, you know, what would a 3, 5, and 7% decrement to their budgets, what would
Oh,
that
I'm
look
glad
like?
someone else is asking these questions.
Yeah.
Awesome, yeah, keep going.
And he didn't really go much further with it. They're under the guise that they're at bare bones minimum budgets. So that we didn't take it any further. I mean, I could sit and do the numbers and you're doing it now, the
Yeah.
three, because you might be able to say, okay, one department could take a 5%, it would hurt, but they could, but then another department couldn't, and they could only go 2. So you can't really peanut butter spread it across the whole town, unfortunately.
So what we would need to do, just real quick, if I take the debt and the insurance out, and I take our OpEx and the school's budget, I'm using the 6.4 because I don't wanna use the higher
use the
one because
7,
that's not money that's money that they don't have to cut anyway. But just using, I'll do both,
Yeah,
okay?
okay.
So the 6.4, so the town's budget less debt and insurance would be 12,262,000. To get to 988, there would have to be joint budget, a co-budget cut between OpEx and the school of 8%.
Yeah.
Ouch.
You're a better man.
I just.
If I didn't have the
What,
damn
4%?
calculator,
You didn't hear me say, I just
He
said
didn't either, he
8%.
just.
And that-
I'm glad you're on my board, on his board.
As 8% left your lips, he said here, 8%.
Mike, that's to take and end up getting rid
I
of
called
the
Poindexter
entire
for a
override or a portion of it.
I said 8% too.
The entire, because the override is 988.
Right,
It's
but
not
you're saying
individual.
8% from both, and you get rid of the override.
That's correct.
Well, wait a minute, though.
That-
Is that
what
based
I'm
on the
in-
6 or 7
The
number?
8%
The
from
six,
both?
now let me do I'll do the
no,
other one,
It's okay,
The-
it's about
between 8 and 10.
8.5 and 9%, if you add a million.
But I don't think we should, I think that's the last resort to go to.
Right.
To go back, I mean, everybody go to get to zero it out. I'm of the belief that you should go for a smaller, if you could work it out, and this is all
Yeah.
semantics, because if
That's
the
a number
school-
I'd throw in to see, you know, like, what do other departments, do we wind up saying, we're starting with 8, how do we tick it back from there? We earn, I don't know, I mean, where else can you claw back some money?
What if
Well,
you did?
maybe 4% from both,
That's what.
And
and
ask
you
for a
end up
lower
having an
override.
override of 400,000 to 500,000, which is, you've
More
actually
palatable.
cut it in half.
Yeah.
It might be, that's why I'm saying it might be more saleable to folks.
Sure.
I'm not saying to get rid of it, because
I don't think you can.
because you're also hearing next year that
And you
they're
do
gonna be
risk,
coming
right.
back too.
Yeah, it'll be more years.
Do you wanna make that 800 next year 1.5 million? If we cut out the 9 now.
But we set a precedent that we wind up, whatever budget it is, we set a precedent that we're really looking hard in trying to make this work. I'm sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Tony.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a possibility the school will come back next year, but I think there's some expenses this year of opening the new school that won't be brought forward. There just is, it's.
You
just
hope
the-
not, yeah.
No, that's just the fact of life of, there's sort of some one-time bills of opening the school.
And it was, discussion on that
recurring.
was attempted, but like I said last night, I believe what I see and remember, and you can, town meeting was recorded, but it was just that people we want the funding in place, and it wasn't gonna,
Yeah.
don't worry about this, we ain't looking at that, we just want the funding for the building. And now, the reality of that process
Well,
is sinking
You
in.
know, now that I'll admit, I mean, I was one of them that said, okay, we have to have a school. I've been in town for 18 years, we kept talking about the school and talking about the school, and it's not there. And quite frankly, just got tired of talking about it, it's time to just do something. You're not gonna make everybody happy.
Even that last advisory, we were all, nobody was saying we don't need a school. It's
Yeah,
the
that's just too
affordability
easy.
at that particular time that we were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it was
But truthfully,
well
Will,
beyond its life cycle.
When you're talking in the 50 million total, there's never a time where a small town like Templeton, it's affordable.
See, one of the things I don't understand about the opening is this. Going way back, I did an analysis of how much oil that all the buildings, and by the way, you can go, the last building guy over to the school district actually had how much oil this place did, Templeton Center, and I looked at the numbers that they'd have for the new school, and it's supposed to be more energy efficient, and it was much greater than the three buildings together.
But I think they explained that they have to use almost worst case scenario until they get some actuals.
Better data. I don't
Yeah,
think it was the
mean,
long pole in the tent
need
anyway.
they need those actuals until, so maybe the first year, next year when they come back for a budget, say, hey, we budgeted, and I don't remember what it was, $300,000 for oil, but you know what? We found that this building was much more energy efficient, we only needed 150,000. So, in the first year, you almost have to use worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
Until you start building that data up.
So at an 8%, I like the examples of what it would do. So just out of a hat, developmental services, their recommended town administrator budget is $162,000. At an 8% cut, that would be
12,000.
I love you guys. I really, really do. So almost $13,000 out of 162. You really have to drill down to their account numbers. Trying to stay away from personnel. It's, do they go to conferences? Do they get certifications? The ones that they can do without. It's saying, you know what? All this discussion of centralizing office supplies, guess what? We're really gonna do it now. It's gonna be one person going with the credit card and saying, I'm going to get paper.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, that's when I look through. That's what those department heads need to go back and say, I've met my goal. Here is my revised budget. I zeroed out my conferences. My certifications are every 2 years anyway, so I zeroed that out. But then developmental, as an example, they come back and said, I've met that goal. If another department says, you know what, I'm coming up short, then we can work through those things, or at least the town administrator at that point.
That's why you have emergency reserve.
Well, you maybe
Right.
even lower that if that's what it takes to
Yeah.
reach the point. If instead of 50 or 45, if you have to take 8% of that. So, I mean,
And these are different
I mean,
courses
I think
of
you would
action
have
that
to
we
maybe
can
take
consider.
the cut in that, but then if you're really cutting people, the likelihood of needing that reserve
it go up.
goes up,
Yeah.
so.
Absolutely.
And
What's
Look
8%
forward
of
to-
1.3 million? Now that I know your super
Adjusting
friends
them.
powers, I'm
130,
120,000.
120,000. So police would have to come up with
That's
120,000.
an officer.
Huh?
That's an officer. That's just not realistic.
Diane just fell out of her chair.
No, I mean, but there's some people that just can't, there's some departments that can't withstand that.
Okay, Diane.
I mean, when we're already, like, for the police, we already
I
know
know.
we're short. So that's the problem is, you just can't peanut butter spread it across the budget, unfortunately.
So just for the exercise that we're conducting, based off the amount of time that we have, what we're talking about is if we decided to do this, basically going to town meeting, and this would be our proposal.
yes.
Okay.
And we did this one year in 16.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did this in
There's
16.
no time for us to like
I agree.
pick things
I-
apart and for,
We
because
did, yes.
Well, because we'd have to meet with
Yeah,
every
that is a-
if we were doing
department.
this 2 months ago,
Excellent
when we could like look at each thing and, but.
The
still
spirit of
didn't
this
have-
committee is offer alternatives to
I
be,
know, I know.
yeah,
We-
I
we
love
did
the way
it.
that you said it.
We did this in 16, we stayed here till like midnight and went through a line item budget and moved stuff around and brought a proposal, and
Right.
it didn't go nowhere, but we did
did that.
this exercise with a line item budget, and we sat here, Gordon had it, the chairman at the time, we were putting out numbers and he was entering in the Excel and boom, and making sure it was
Yeah.
balancing out.
I would so
Oh, right, lot
like to leave
changes,
that
that
up
would
to
be
the
so nice, yeah.
departments though, and say, hey,
Yeah, like
Yeah,
to
I guess
say,
that's a
what
good
can
point,
you,
yeah,
But
yeah.
It's not gonna happen. You leave it to the departments, it's not gonna happen.
But to be fair, we don't know who needs what certifications. You know what I mean? Does our town clerk need her certifications this year or next year? If she's, just as an example, if she has travel for conferences on her department list, perhaps that's mandatory for her job for this coming year. And if she doesn't do that, she's no longer, whatever, certified or employable
Right.
or whatever. And then we're in a whole different problem.
you're employable, you
So,
just.
right, so we can't make those calls unless we do all of our homework that goes all with that, which there's no time at this point for us to do that.
The certified,
You got it.
and the certification leads to that, and it was voted by town meeting way back when, that they would be entitled to $1,000, like, bonus for obtaining that certification and maintaining it.
Right, so see, those are all the
That's
things
like-
that we wouldn't know those nuances as we're sitting here
That's like
saying,
5
we're gonna
people
cut
will-
this out, we can't.
No, you're right.
The
And
treasurer
I,
collector, the
yeah, I don't
accountant.
wanna do what Ashburnham is doing, which is cutting all their capital fund stuff, because if you follow
And I'm-
what they had in the Gardner News,
I know the next
Those are the
statement I'm
good
gonna
news
make is
things
not gonna
that
go
we need
over
to do.
well, but as soon as they had their budgets, each individual department in January, we should have had every one of those departments here, and I was advocating that. Why? Because I knew that it doesn't go good. It doesn't go good. It's nice to have the joint one, it's nice that we were able to end up doing that, but you actually have to sit there and talk to each department head. And as I told Amy, because she had a question last week, is, what did we do in the years that we had those each independent department? We looked at their budget and we asked a lot of harder questions than what you asked, granted. But when it came down to it, we agreed with some of them, we cut some of them, and oh, by the way, we actually raised it because we asked the questions and found out that what he was trying to accomplish wasn't gonna happen with the expense budget that he was going for. It just was not gonna happen. And that's how we came up with the budgets. It's a grueling process, I agree. It took us a better than a month, and you had at least 3 departments every week that you were looking at.
So,
But I don't think we would be looking as hard, because you wouldn't have had the school.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't get them all at the same time,
Right.
then it gives you the reason to go, like we're doing now, digging, what if, can we do this?
yeah.
If you don't have the pressure, because if the school came in like 300,000 more than last year, is what they were looking for.
Yeah, but you better had
wouldn't be
you had a
so
better
hard,
idea, Jeff.
know, it's,
If you had those early on, each department,
And by the way,
and by the time you get there, you might have,
more departments were willing to come.
oh, yeah.
But I
Back
do-
then, they're not willing to come in the
yeah,
evening
but
hours
I do think the
now. They-
departments know their stuff better than we ever will, so.
Yeah.
So, quick question for you, if the override passes town meeting, it still needs to be voted on?
Yes,
If the town voted for an 8% decrease, would that also need to go to the town for a vote?
No,
no,
No.
it's just, they're just make, you can.
So that would
see,
be
yeah,
at
you-
town meeting,
If
that
you
would
wanna
be,
cut
town meeting.
budgets, you can make an amended motion.
Just
for
curious.
boom for this,
Okay.
and, cause anybody can do that, you can go to town meeting and say, I wanna
somebody
make
could
an
stand
amended
up and
motion.
say, I wanna take all departments, 5% cut in town meeting, and if it passes, that's what's gonna end up happening, and that's gonna, for the budget year on.
But see,
Then-
that's a dangerous thing, because, like we were just talking, if you peanut butter, you can't peanut butter spread that 5% across every department. You
That's-
just can't do it.
Again, I'm gonna say this, emergency reserve, that's what it's, and I hear what you're saying, but that's to help
8%
spread
too.
that peanut butter and get it so that it's lumped in the right places.
So the reason I was asking is, so
With
in
5%
what
of
order will
Rhinebeck
this go?
versus
So is the override vote first?
The school budget number
See if you
is,
think you're gonna backfill it.
is
with
the
that.
number. They have to, what the school
Right.
wants. That's a vote.
But at town meeting,
At town meeting.
would that take place before anyone can propose budget changes?
No.
Whatever the
Depends
warrant article
the
is.
order
Yeah, we
that
don't
they
have
put it
that.
in.
Or
Right.
the article.
And besides, whatever order the selectmen put the warrant in, town meeting can vote to take stuff out of order.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we
You-
wanna
you
have a
can.
question, say there's 30 articles.
You
we
can
wanna
move
question
something forward.
30
Right,
articles.
because again, just theoretically, you've got two very conflicting views on ways that you might be able to solve this. One being an override, one being budget cuts, and again,
Well-
what's right or wrong, or maybe there's something in between.
I think it's
But
in
how things are
between.
voted on might actually, the
Here's-
order might actually.
Here's
change
an
the
actual
outcome.
scenario that happened. We went into town meeting, we were
All right.
going through the process. All the people that wanted the school, okay, per se, the override per se, ended up moving their article up. Got voted on at town meeting, okay? And then we went on to the budget, et cetera. It went to the ballot box and got turned down. That's when we ended up getting that. So, and by the way, those people that voted for the school that year, it was like evacuation time. Nothing, none of the other budget was talked about,
That is their right as a citizen to go to the
Exactly
town
right.
meeting for what
And-
they want.
and that's what happens. They get it moved out of place, vote on it, and move on.
Don't wanna listen to someone go on.
So the scenario though, to your question, the school budget, you vote on it.
Yep.
Then there's a contingency article for an override. It says, or it will say in the school's budget, contingent upon the passage of a Prop 2.5
Right.
override.
Mhm.
That has to go, because we'll be doing it opposite than we did last year. You'll go to the election ballot and people will vote on it. And if it passes, then, that's it, the override takes place. If it doesn't, then.
It gets
the-
kicked back to the school.
So, but that's where I'm confused though. So we're talking about a potential alternative to an override of departmental budget cuts. How would that play into that town meeting votes?
If you could get the school committee to consider they could come to town meeting and make a motion to or allow the selectmen, but more appropriately would be to make an amended motion for the school. But if we could agree on that, the school committee would it has to certify it on the budget number.
The school committee actually came in that
So-
particular year, and they had one number that was on. They made an amended motion, and they lowered it by, I don't know, some number. I can't remember the number per se. Do you remember the number?
No, not if I.
It was a couple $100,000, I believe.
So-
And that's when it passed at annual town meeting. But there still was an override on the ballot.
Okay, so the ballot
For
question
last.
And
is,
that's kind of where, yeah.
the ballot
I'm confused
question
right now.
is, the Narragansett Regional School District,
Yeah.
number of 7 million to fund the shares, contingent upon the passage of a ballot question, Prop 2.5.
So does that basically mean that everything that we're talking about is irrelevant?
If,
No, you can
no,
change it.
Yes,
You have
if,
to make a
On-
motion
You
to
could,
change
you
it
could
on the
lower
floor.
the amount,
That-
right?
That's what I was trying to.
Unless you can convince someone to do it before the
Yeah.
warrant's
Right.
final
Yeah.
next
Okay.
week.
Okay.
and
So
you
that-
you
that was-
kinda
that's
have
pretty
to
much
be
what I was getting to.
lined up
No way.
to
Oh, I
agree
s-
to do that.
Yeah.
So the school committee would vote, because whatever you would vote at town meeting, just like last year when you missed something,
Yeah.
you send it to the school committee and they recertify the vote. And as long as it gets straightened out
Yeah.
before the tax recap sheet, then you
The
satisfy
school committee could
all the
come in
stuff.
and, on that override question and say, amended motion, instead of 988, they could come in and say, we only want 788.
Yeah.
So they have that opportunity to make a amended motion, when the override question comes up.
Okay, thank you.
I think, is that what you're looking?
Yep.
Okay,
So,
yes.
So what are we doing? Like, are we,
so,
We're
sorry,
struggling
I'm
here.
sorry.
Well, no, I-
Like, there's so much discussion, so I'm like, so what's our plan?
I'm sort of in the same boat, like,
Okay.
what or have we decided on anything? And I'm
We're
not-
struggling,
not
that
sure
they
if
can
we
end
have.
up trying
I
to
don't
get
think we've
something.
decided on, are we gonna recommend, do a motion to recommend a different budget or not. I think that's gonna need a lot more discussion before we do that, because without talking to every single department,
We have no choice, but
we can't assume, well, you could just take a 4% cut or whatever.
We can propose that, and you could bring that to town meeting, and then we could have the discussion. You know, you could have the selectmen, you could have department heads there, they could stand up and say, yeah, we can do that, no, we can't do that, and then,
oh, by
that's
the way,
what town meeting's supposed to be all about. is
right, by the
doing
way,
all
when
that,
you
but-
make your recommended budget, okay, which is our right by Mass General Law, the selectmen could come up and end up saying, we want to end up making a substitute motion for one department, all departments, or whatever. I mean, that's,
Well, I think your motion would be out of the OpEx and not a peanut butter spread. everything
that's,
else.
that's the nice thing about town meeting.
Think
We
it's
have an
happy to
opportunity
pick and
to,
choose, though. I
to take
mean,
and
if-
end up working that
Yes.
Okay.
with the folks.
So from last night, they're going to, the Board of Selectmen, that is, are scheduled, and if you follow town bylaw, they have to do it by the 10th, because we're supposed to have it. The advisory committee is supposed to have the approved warrant by April 10th. They are gonna vote to finalize the warrant, and they put the ballot question action off. They're going to do that at the selectmen's meeting next Wednesday. And Carter said that they get the warrant, the town meeting warrant, approved out of draft. It would be sent to us electronically the following day. We could even meet, potentially we could meet next Thursday because the conference room is still open, or we can go till the next week. Have time
Well,
to
this is-
digest this.
I'm not-
Has everybody gone through the warrant?
I haven't
And-
gone
and
through
it's-
more,
I know it's in draft, so, but sometime before pre-town meeting, which is probably gonna be the date that we discussed earlier in the year, May 2nd. Go through the warrant and anything we see that we need an answer, we have a question on, get that. Cause otherwise we'll be here at pre-town meeting. We could invite, Carter, but if he's gotta check on something, or they gotta look at this, if we could get
No,
questions.
I mean, I think if we get the warrant
Asked
next Thursday, give us a week to digest it. Basically, the agenda for our next meeting
Would be-
essentially be the warrant.
Yeah.
And some of the budget
And then-
stuff, they might make decisions.
And in preparation for the pre-town meeting.
Because I'll just have to, let's see, the 10th, so, yeah.
When do we get the electronic version of the budget?
He said last night, didn't he, that he would send it at the close of their meeting, so that it will be sent to us on the 10th electronically. But it would be after, like, they are gonna certify it at that meeting, cause
Right.
it's their meeting day, so he would do his best to send it,
The
like,
la-
straight
the
away.
last one,
I think
I-
that's how it was.
The last budget that they sent us, and I knew it wasn't the last one, I played around with it, and the columns that they're gonna show, I actually went to I went to one department, and I played around, and I gave us the ability to take and change the numbers individually and have it roll up to that other one, so it can be done. And I suggest that we might take a look in doing that. It means a little bit of work for us, but I think looking at certain people here that are, no, I'm not talking about just one, I'm not talking about just one individual. We have the ability to do that on an Excel sheet. I think, just, and the discussions here, I see people here that have some experience with Excel and also the actual formulas and putting that in. Once you put one formula in, and you can end up, you know, cutting and pasting a lot of stuff, and all you have to do is make sure that the columns and, you know, the alpha and the numerical match up, so it does spill over. I think we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, of course.
And
So,
do we have enough time? We probably have to meet more than, quite often towards the end of the month before the
all right.
the pre-town.
So for the next agenda, the minutes, the reserve policy, the warrant, budget, and I'm gonna tack the ballot questions just in case they throw, I mean, we don't recommend on that, but if it's gonna be, there's contingency articles in the warrant, so we should at least be aware of, the ballot question, the final.
Was there
And the
any-
other thing that's
Sorry.
hanging out there that they have not really addressed, and I am going to email Carter on Monday morning, is the advisory bylaw.
Right, so I was gonna ask you, have you talked with the chairman of the Board of Selectmen on that, and have you come to an agreement?
We talked, we met, and, he questioned what, he didn't like the fact that the committee was still gonna
Right.
appoint things. He had an issue with that and something else. And I said, well, you know, we worked on this for like 4 meetings. You guys have had it since February 7th. We heard nothing back. I don't know, I could be more plainer than, you know, this is what we submitted and at this last moment, now you're gonna say, and it's totally up to the selectmen what they put on the warrant.
Well, then, okay.
I think we should be prepared that
Yeah.
if they do put their version on it, that we should end up having a recommended,
We
you
worked.
know, a substitute motion.
And that was the couple of the things that the chairman of the Board of Selectmen says, you know, why do you still have that? Why can't you do this? I'm going, look, we spent 4 meetings on this.
I mean,
The day before that,
No.
I emailed it to you all. We talked about it and said, you know, the wording, we tweaked a couple of words and stuff, and we discussed about changing that, and then we said, the committee was like, no, this is what we,
Well, right,
voted
so,
on
so
it
I
and sent it.
personally,
I think it was a
in
good
that one,
compromise.
right, in that one instance, I didn't necessarily agree, I think it's a semantics issue, but the majority of this committee said, leave it the way it was. We reworded it, and that, so I'll stand by that as a committee, that is our position going forward,
Yeah.
and
in that specific instant.
Yeah.
I said, you guys have had this since
Yeah.
February. If there was an issue, you should've just said, hey,
Yeah.
and we could've, but I said,
I mean,
at the time, it's not like we went,
The TA
boom,
had a
boom,
big
boom, and
issue.
said, here you go. We
not
talked
about
about
the
it,
TA.
discussed it.
It's not about what the town administrator
know.
thinks, it's what the Board of Selectmen think.
Well, and I don't know if anybody else on the Board of Selectmen have seen it.
I don't know.
if they didn't, shame on them.
Yep.
They should have all seen it, cause
I
I
concur.
sent it to them. And that's a responsibility of the chairman of any board or committee, is ensure that it's on the agenda so everybody can see it and discuss it. Because it's the boards of selectmen's responsibility what goes on the town meeting warrant. Whether they put, you know, we submit this for a warrant article for the in with the bylaw stuff. If they say no, and they have done it, and it's happened in the past, they said no, and not just to us, to other entities, and they wanna present, you know, their version of whatever they want, they can do it on the warrant. But that is where that stands, and, so it's
Okay.
minutes, reserve policy, warrant, the budget, and ballot questions. You all have the fourth quarter, 17 final, so you could look
Okay.
at that, compare it with the 18.
I
I
already
wish
sent
we
you
had a
the,
third good year, but 16, like I said, there was like 68 transfers throughout the year, and a lot of them were at,
I just really want the data to see if there's trends.
right. And 19 would really tell the story, I think.
Yep.
But
We're just not gonna get
we
the
just,
information.
we're not
No.
gonna have it to line up.
This is why I'm a big advocate of a spend plan.
yeah, yeah.
It has
I
been talked
sense-
about both entities, it's just,
It's easier to
Okay,
cut.
what else?
I sense the amount of free cash every year has gone up, if that's what you're looking at.
No, it's just not that, Will. It's, if I have a spend plan, then it gives me trends to whether, are they, I don't wanna say padding, cause I think that's a kind of are they not maybe putting as much thought into the budget as they could, comparing, okay, you know what, last year, I spent this much on this, but I still have some of that left over, so I don't need as much. Or they say, or I spent this much on this last year, so that's mine plus 2% cost of living or whatever. So
Right.
I like to see, I like trends analysis,
Yeah.
because it paints a picture.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, the Olympic sport where they throw out the high and the low,
Yep.
because then you get your averages, so,
So
okay.
that'll be that, and, like I said, next Wednesday, it's, I'm gonna go to the meeting, cause they're gonna,
I'm not gonna be here.
and I wanna push the fact that, hey, if you vote the warrant, we need it, if you
Yep.
tend to follow the bylaw and stuff.
Yep.
Uh,
I think their intent is to give it to us the very next day.
So, they.
They're gonna get
like
their
I said,
signatures.
Barring
Yep.
anything, you know, I don't know if they're still gonna try to push for another police officer, but you looked at the trends of the cost of one, it's not in the cards. Because, and that's pretty realistic, I mean, just the way the Worcester County retirement is
Yep.
going. And
If we
it's mandatory.
didn't have 988,000 staring down us, I could see us
Well,
going
that
to
would
the
be
community
doable.
to
Right.
say,
That would be
a police
doable.
officer, please, you know, a little bit more on your
Right.
tax rate, and you're getting an entire extra officer, and Chief
Right.
Bennett would stand up and say why, but we're not there. If we figured out some, you know, pencil over the ear way to cut it and say, you know, congratulations, everyone pats themselves on the back, and we get down to we would be there, but we're not there.
I don't think so.
So,
Okay.
Maybe we get there. Maybe some of the discussions tonight spur some ideas, and we try and figure out how we can do some of these things.
I just
I know that's a
don't
mouthful, but
Yeah, I just
there's
don't-
other hidden opportunities within our town, revenue-wise. It's just, there are other people that decide for some of those revenue streams to say, you know
Unfortunately,
what, this year, like, our capital plan is fat. Why? Because we have some of that additional bill payers in town and said, Light and Water said, I'm gonna help you out with, that sign or otherwise. And the good news story, people are upset about, the street sweeper getting out there. We're getting a new or a refurbished street sweeper.
Okay.
The hot box is coming, you know, holes inside holes. We better repair those things. We're switching over to salt. A lot of really good things to be excited about.
if it's done, I will use Gardner as an example, the city of Gardner, they used Chapter 90 money to buy their first hot box. And instead of purchasing coal patch, which is expensive, they started taking, when they pave a road and they grind it.
Yeah.
They would keep a chunk of those grindings.
grindings.
When they got done with a paving project, instead of the excess paving, because you sometimes gets dumped on the side of the road, it just
We're
gets
getting
taken.
there, yeah.
They kept it, we paid for it, we want it. And they saved enough money by utilizing those materials
Yep.
and less coal patch. The money that they saved, that they normally would have spent on coal patch, they were
Right.
able to purchase a second hot box.
Yeah.
And they go
think
out,
Bob Skozik
they
and
send
his
out
team are
2
gonna get
crews
there.
and go out and do it, and they have, their road boss goes out and ensures, you know, here, you're doing this road, this road, this road, bum, bum, bum. And he goes out and checks. And if he doesn't look like it's, and they bought a plate compactor, instead of just backing it over a couple times with the tires, which a lot of times that's why, you know, potholes patched today and 2 days later it's back again. If it's not done right, he makes them go back out there and redo it. So they got the equipment to do the work, they were saving money reusing materials, and they have, you know, they actually go out, a supervisor actually goes out and checks on it. I know that because I went down and I met with them, when they first bought it, and then that was reported. So I went down to see their operation and talked to the road boss, and he told me, he says, you know, we're not buying the coal patch, and he showed me, recycling the stuff, and so, yeah, you gotta bust it up with a loader, you put it in a dump truck, guys gotta climb in there, throw it in, and heat it up, but
Right.
the end result was they've saving money, getting a job done, and that's good news for the
And there's-
taxpayers.
And there's new technology out there that they can end up repairing manholes. I get some of that information, and I'm just totally amazed at, they drill out the thing and put a new manhole in. They have a machine to do that.
Yep.
If you had one of those, it would save a lot of man-hours for the community. Those are the type of things that,
Capital planning, yeah.
yeah.
So,
So 8% is the buzz number, right?
Mr. Terenzini, cut 8% across the board, no override, and your sales pitch will become much easier.
Yeah,
Or maybe, is that 8% for both?
yeah.
8% for both.
Mr. Casavan, do you hear that? 8%, cut it.
In either, you know, whether it was the 7 million number or the 6 million number, it still came out to
It's
be
negligible.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
negligible.
School
The
committee
reason why I
members
don't
that are
think those
watching,
numbers are
Gonna get all the
backwards.
hate mail now, Jeff.
I know I'm eating up airtime, but it's if you have a leaner budget, if people are actually executing higher, then they're actually, you don't need a higher reserve fund.
Right.
If they're executing lower, that means there's risk. Does that,
Other way around.
is it the other way around?
Yeah.
I gotta get,
Around.
so I gave it to you,
Backwards.
it's in your
The more
email.
they expend, the more likely they could go over.
Okay.
Yes. So if they're gonna expend 100% of their budget, then there's a bigger chance that something
But remember the
unexpected
right.
will require those big
A
funds.
higher-
So we want a higher reserve
Yeah.
if they're spending everything they have.
Okay,
Yeah, your theory is right, you
right,
flipped it.
so just
for-
email, we'll change it,
Yeah.
but at least I got the language in the table right. Kind
Both
of.
entities, you need to get together, do 8% and 8%, we'll meet in the middle, and we'll all be good.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like
Yes.
to make a motion to adjourn.
Well, he's got member comments. I have one member comment.
We already did that.
Well, this is for one.
We've been on member comments for.
All right, so we don't have a second.
I'd like to say this is my last member comment.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm very happy that we're having this discussion. This is the type of discussion that this committee always has to have, and it's very positive, because you end up getting stuff. I wish the selectmen would end up doing the same thing, and for those gentlemen that are running for the select board, I'd like to see this also transpire to
ladies.
that board.
God bless them nuts.
Gentlemen and ladies.
Not running.
Yes.
I'll second now.
All right. We have a
I'll make them,
Do you have a comment?
I don't, I was just seconding the motion to adjourn.
Okay, second the motion. I'm always waiting for you, because you're very quiet, but you're a very smart gal, and
Oh, thank you.
I know you're looking, you could add, you just,
Oh, yeah.
I keep my left eye on you, 'cause the quiet ones you always watch for. Motion to adjourn.
second.
Already
All
did.
those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Sorry, you're out
Meeting
now.